Hi, I'm David Eames, and welcome to the On Your Mind podcast. As always, I'm joined by the wonderful Owen Oxley and the lovely Mikey Markham. Today, we're going to be talking about loneliness, feeling lonely. Mikey, have you ever been lonely?
100%, yeah. I feel less so now, as again, I really enjoy my own company, and I like who I am and the life I'm living, which is, as a videographer, is quite insular. I'm spending a lot of my days editing. I go to cafes though. I like the hum of everybody around, but I am very much in my own little world. But prior to doing the videography and prior to sort of liking myself, I used to feel very lonely. And I suppose I did a lot of unconscious behaviour in ostracising myself on purpose. I think I was trying to test people, like, do you actually want me around? And I'd do a lot of tactics to see if people did care for me or did want me. And I think acting like that tended to push them away even further. So I outcast myself a lot. But when I feel lonely nowadays, I kind of feel it as a good sign, because I believe we're kind of supposed to thrive and survive in a tribe.
Okay.
And I feel when you're starting to get sparks of loneliness, it's just a sign of you encoded in you to tell you to hang on, stop a minute. What about socializing and being around people? So instead of feeling the pain heavily, I reach out to a friend, or I just say, hey guys, what you've been doing today, or whatever that is. So I try and spot the signs now and listen to that feeling. Whereas before, I just used to go into that ego self and beat myself up and be sort of, nobody likes you, nobody wants you, you're a piece of this, piece of that. And really felt uncomfortable in it.
So
Yeah.
maybe it's not actually loneliness that you're feeling there, it's like feeling excluded.
Yes.
So I kind of recognise that. I mean, my issue that I had to work through in my own therapy was sensitive abandonment, which came from being adopted as a child. And so I'm quite at risk from feeling excluded in things. I think that might be a little bit different from loneliness. Owen, what do you think?
Yeah, I think when Mikey was explaining that then, my understanding of loneliness, or my experience, if you like, that I have probably highlighted to myself is slightly different. Because I think a lot of the times, I always struggle with labels. You remember when we worked together and there's this process where you could be a red person, which means you're out there, or a yellow person, which means you do this, or a green person, which is analytical, and a blue person. And it used to aggravate me because not everyone's one of those things all the time. And it's all right to be a mix of everything. And I think with labels, especially with loneliness or with abandonment or with confidence or whatever it is, it's down to circumstance for myself quite a lot of the time. And same as Mikey, my personality is quite Marmite, and I can push people away, or I can draw them in. And I think where I've felt quite lonely before is where I've invested either time in people or effort in people or energy, and I've needed them to have my back. And you like to think you've built yourself up into this nice little community and you've got everyone's best interest at heart and you're trying to do everything you can to help each other. And it comes time for your turn to, I just need a little favour. And that person then lets you down, or they can't do it, or because obviously everyone's living their own life and sometimes there could be a valid reason, but when it happens more and more often and they'll take and take but not give, it can be quite a lonely experience because you've got nowhere to turn. You've got no one to look to. And what I find is, because that loneliness will sit quite heavy, it sits kind of reserved because I'm still busy. So while I'm busy, it's okay. But then if I still don't get an outlet to be able to either talk to you or talk to whoever, to be able to let the people know how I feel, because a lot of times when your feelings are shared or expressed or explained, I'm not saying someone needs to tell you you're wrong or can explain them, but just talking through feelings, you can almost feel yourself that you might be overreacting or you might be thinking a bit too hard about something. Only my personal experience. But the problem is that my loneliness, because what it'll do, it'll make me snappy or it'll make me short, because I'm almost getting mad that someone else isn't recognising that I'm lonely. They're not picking up on it. I'm the one that has to admit it or come to terms with it and talk about it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And it's quite a difficult thing, because when you are in that quite low state and you feel like you're not abandoned, or maybe if you feel abandoned or you feel lost or whatever it is, your psyche's quite low and your energy's really low. If you're trying to talk to someone that's actually in a really good place and they haven't got the time or the mind space to be able to talk to you about that, it's not really a deep conversation, and it almost can be brushed off as like, yeah, you'll be all right. It's okay. Come on, let's carry on. And the thing is, I think you need to give it the time and focus and energy to be able to understand or work a way through it, which is how I've managed to find, obviously being a bit older now, you find new ways of coping. And I suppose it's...
I think...
That's all right.
There you go.
I think that, like Mikey, what you're describing as loneliness may not be loneliness.
Okay.
It may be disappointment and feeling let down.
Yeah.
I think we're talking about a subject here that maybe the three of us don't have much experience of. Because we're all surrounded by people, and we're quite gregarious people, and we're outgoing people. We're alone, but occasionally, and sometimes that's quite a nice thing.
Yeah.
But I'm thinking about people who live alone. They might be older in life, family have moved away, and there's a sense of community's disappeared very often these days. Maybe there's nobody actually living next door to people, during the day.
Yeah.
That kind of loneliness of, wow, the walls are just echoing back to me again today.
Yeah.
How fine is that line of exclusion and loneliness? Because I've really felt when I'm just in my day, completely not spoke to anyone, not had an interaction really. Yes, I'm around people, but I've had this sense of you don't really get me though. Nobody kind of understand. I'm not so much that now. I've started to find my tribe and build my tribe, but I lived a life of butterflying round and never feeling understood, and I really sense that as like lonely place to be in. But I just, that line feels very blurred or thin.
Actually, it's a tricky one. This, because I say I don't want to be in the business of telling people what they feel.
I get you.
But I think it's that thing of those sort of feelings, and I recognise them of myself sometimes, still today, but more often in the past. They're about our own insecurities.
That's what I was about to say about self-confidence.
Rather than maybe about an imposed situation.
I get you.
Yeah, and that's what I was going to say. It's more sometimes having a little bit of self-confidence or something that because it is easy to spiral, and when you've got no one to bounce an idea off, the spiral happens even faster. I mean, I hate to think of anyone as lonely. I hate to think of anyone being left out. We had an elderly neighbour. And she hated barbecues, hated them, but we'd always invite her. And she'd come 5 minutes, and she'd make her an excuse. And which the thing was, it wasn't a problem. You don't have to come. You could stand by the fence, but we'd take a food round or whatever. And it was a case. I don't like to think anyone's excluded in anything ever. And obviously, even if I'm at my lowest point, if I find out that a kid's being left out of something or someone's being, I can't stand it. I hate it. I'd much rather make sure that they're involved just to feel a part of something.
Yeah, I feel
Do you know
that.
what I mean?
I was listening to a podcast yesterday, and it said that loneliness was one of the leading causes of death in older people. So it is something that I like this conversation. I may not truly understand to that degree, and it is quite interesting hearing that perspective.
Yeah, I mean, having worked sometimes with older clients who've been living on their own, it's been a real issue.
Yeah.
What I encourage them to do is to describe themselves of feeling lonely rather than being lonely.
Yeah.
Because
you can change
there's
that.
a sense you can maybe do
you're
something
empowered.
about that.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's a hard process, encouraging people to try and do things. But once we start getting in that situation of feeling that there's no control over the way we're feeling, it's something that's imposed on us externally.
Yeah, you're just along for the ride.
Yeah.
And essentially waiting for, death or whatever, which is even more impactful of loneliness.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, it's heartbreaking to think that people have to experience it, but there are millions of people doing it all the time. And I suppose, obviously, you've spoken to enough of them to. I mean, even if you've had an hour at home on your own and you're waiting for someone to come in, it's one of those things. Once you've done all your bits and bobs, it feels strange, when the house is completely empty.
Yeah.
I mean, I know personally, having children is one of the greatest things that's ever happened to me. But more and more as I've got older, I've felt a little bit more alone. Mm-hmm. And that's only because I had 2 girls that when they were small and I could influence whatever we did, it was always scare electric and Nerf guns and fighting and all the rest of it. And then they've always been brilliant. Now they're getting a bit older. They're a bit more like their mum. But they're also getting older that they don't really want to be involved with their dad. And my wife's also really involved and very busy with a lot of stuff. So where I had a lot of lifelines before where I would be with my wife or be with the kids or whatever, they're kind of all doing their own thing. And it's getting more and more difficult because, and obviously I've voiced this, and once I've sat down with my partner and everything and spoke about it, we can make a change. But the main thing that's avoiding absolute loneliness is the dogs. And I know that sounds insane, but for me, they are the greatest thing in the world. And literally, I can go for a walk, I can tell them everything I'm thinking, at which point I can probably filter out 70% of it is me being a bit insecure. But at the same time, they've listened, they've had a walk, we've had a wander around.
They give you better advice than I do.
1,000,000%. 1,000,000%. Because it's just, everything's going to be all right, dude.
Yeah.
And then when I get in, they're the first to meet me at the door. Whenever I see them,
look how
they're
amazing
happiest.
this tree is.
Exactly. And all it takes is a little biscuit, and they're your best friend. So I think in small pockets, I'm not saying it's lonely constantly, but you can find yourself sitting there thinking, what am I even doing?
It's probably is something that exists a lot more in older people, through reasons outside of their control. I was sat really reflecting, trying my best to reflect about 5 or 6 years ago, when I had a year, so maybe nearly year and a half, 2, of this character where it was party central on the farm. And I just remember being in the house, and it probably hit like summertime, and we had 3-4 months, and people would just come in and going and coming and going. And if you imagine sort of, do you know where films do that timeline, everything goes fast and you're just sat in the middle of it? That is what I felt like. I remember this noise and this busyness and everything, and seeing so many different faces and just feeling so isolated and alienated from it. And then when everyone left as well, and they took all your drugs, or they took all your money, or things had just kept coming and going, because I was a people pleaser and a bit of a daft lad. I really felt I was like, not exclusion then, because everyone was your mate, but I felt so lost in that sea of faces and everything.
Yeah, one of the loneliest places in the world is in a party when you don't feel connected to anyone. And
Yeah.
it feels like everyone else is part of it and you're not.
I used to cry massively after everyone left. Like I felt sick. I felt I'd just been used a little bit. Everyone had come and it was false and fake and contrived.
Yeah.
And
You were medicating with yourself with a medicine that made you feel worse.
yeah, that is a great quote.
Yeah.
That is awesome.
But and the problem is you'll probably then double down and start a party again next week and that's obviously what goes into addiction and all the rest of it, isn't it? Because the thing is, you can either get off the train and face this pain that's going to be the worst thing you've ever been through, or you can just have a little bit more and we'll do it next week. We'll do it next week. And I think
tops it up.
Yeah, I mean, one big thing for me was the value of friendship and actual true friends. True friends, people that got you back. Not necessarily the ones that always agree with you, but a true best friend that will tell you that you're being stupid, or that will tell you that you're doing the wrong thing, or give you good advice. And 1 or 2 solid friends is so much better than 1,000 flaky friends, or just flaky people.
While I was sat there feeling that then, thinking about it and reflecting, that's what was in my head. And I remember just thinking, I wish I had a mate that just told me I was being a dick so I could stop doing it.
Yeah.
And that's what I needed at that time. I didn't
Honestly.
know anybody or have anybody to tell me.
You have now.
Yeah. Mate, I'll actually cry on the podcast.
Yeah, we'll shut it down straight away.
But I was really trying to feel that feeling then. And I remember a whole summertime at least, just thinking, I could end all this. Like, I'm so ready to not do this anymore because I'm living for other people.
Well, David will tell you, I was almost always a people pleaser. Whatever, just trying to not win favour, but just trying to help or do whatever I could, and I go out my way to sort out people's computers or films or TV shows or do whatever I could. And it was a hard reality when, like I said before, then when you ask for the favour back and it's not there, or I used to do something, and there was one guy at work. I'd worked with him for a long time, and he knew me, he knew my wife, he knew the kids, and I can remember he asked me to do a job. I said, yeah, no worries, dude. I said, just what? Can you remember my kids' names? And he went, so, sorry. I said, what's my eldest name? And he went, oh, you call her something funny, don't you? Oh, what is it? And bear in mind, I knew for a fact I'd just mentioned both of their names 10 seconds. I wasn't just trapping him, but I was proving a point in my own brain to say, I'll tell you what, I don't need to be doing something for you. And it could come down to anything. There's a guy that would take hardware, like routers and computers and all this other stuff. And what was, can you remember my wife's name? And I know it seems really, mental. But the thing was, it justified it immediately in my brain to stop. Stop trying to find these people. I've got great friends. We've mentioned it before, with the Joe Rogan thing. Yeah. I met Joe Rogan. I wanted him to be my best friend, and I wanted him to know everything about my life. And I wanted us to be the bestest. But I've actually got friends that do know all that, but they're not Joe Rogan. So, just stick with the ones that are really good. Do you know what I mean? The people that are already invested in me.
I think we have touched on two topics in this episode. I 100% know that, and we'll title it two different topics. But is there a similar remedy for those feelings, or is it very different apart to how to find that remedy?
I think they are different things.
They are, yeah.
But I mean, it's also valid to use the word feeling lonely.
Yeah.
Because it's that, if you not have relationships that are working particularly well, it can be feeling lonely. You can be in a room on your own and absolutely content as well. Being alone and being lonely are not the same thing.
No, completely.
I quite like my own company. I didn't used to, and that was a time when I used to drink far too much because I'd be down the pub to try and fill that. Yeah. Even being, with my wife wasn't enough. I needed crowds around me. Yeah. And that was about inadequacy in me. But on today, I want us to focus a little bit, almost externally, about what can we do for the people around us who might be feeling
that's nice, yeah. Particularly around where we're at.
Yeah, and it's not about necessarily having to do a lot, but just to say good morning to people as you pass them on the street. Yeah, just that mindful. I'll tell you a little story from me from about 30 years ago. The local vicar asked me to visit an old guy that lived not far away because he was living on his own. He'd lost his wife some time before. And I thought, don't want to do that. It's going to be so boring. I really didn't want to do it. But the vicar asked me in a way that I felt I couldn't say no. I went round to see that guy, and he became one of the most valuable people I'd ever met. Yeah, he was a guy called Jack Burns. He'd won the military medal as a sergeant in the Second World War. He'd been at Narvik. He'd been on the D-Day landings. Well, he'd been actually in the gliders that went into Pegasus Bridge behind the enemy lines on D-Day, and he was on the Rhine crossings as well. And I'm quite interested in military history, and we had hours of conversation and so much fun. And he used to give me vegetables that he'd grown out of his garden, and it was a great relationship. Yeah, for the brief time it lasted. And I thought it was going to be boring. Yeah, and it helped him, but it helped me even more.
Yeah. I think it's really easy to discount, especially with the elderly. I mean, I've always had a wicked relationship with older people because they can't get away from it as easy as younger ones.
You can't run. Yeah.
No, but you forget everyone's born a baby. Everyone you've got your experiences, but everyone's had their 30s, their 40s, their 50s. If you're lucky enough, you live to 60, 70, 80. And I think it is fascinating to understand what some people have been through, especially as the generational gaps and things like skills that people have is fascinating because it's just so different. But I've had very similar experiences where I've been not made to, but it was a case that my granddad lived at an old people's complex, but we'd nip in to see others, and before long they'd always remember you, and they'd always, even if you made a point of you had Ribena, let's just say, when you walked in. The next week when they knew you're visiting your granddad, they've got Ribena ready for you. And it's just such a wonderful thing that as much as they're lonely, they're using some of that now that they're not, even if it's an hour out of their week, that they're not lonely because they're going out their way to go and do something for you. And I think it's priceless.
So it's good to just think, like, you've always got something to offer and they've always got something to give. Like, in that situation, this is going to be really boring. But I suppose if you could have reprogrammed in your mind, I wonder what gem we could find a common connection on here. You'd go into that interaction with a bit of...
It's one of the lessons I learned there.
Yeah.
Of not to prejudge the situation, and that everyone's got value.
I'm going to sieve for it.
Undiscovered value. Didn't have to sieve for it. It was just there.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, he was a fascinating man.
Yeah.
Everyone will always have something. Everyone's got a story, haven't they? And on that, there's always going to be something that aligns.
Yeah.
I think, honestly, even with this podcast today, I'll sort of recalibrate and refresh my mind on it. My granddad, like, he's got my grandma there, but I know that they just go into that mundane, the TV's just on in the background. My grandma can't always give the most riveting conversation, and just going in and sitting for half an hour instead of being in pilot mode is so valuable. And
you get that when you see it as a choice that you're making rather than a duty.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
Would you start saying, I should go and see him, I ought to do this, ought to do that, then you're not really in it.
Yeah.
But hey, no, I choose to do it because I value that person.
Yeah.
Then you get a lot more from it.
It's been that nice feeling of, I can feel myself going to the next. And I remember one time with my granddad where I sat, he always says the same thing. He's like, are you making money then? Are you making money? And I felt it was a passive experience I turned it into because I was a bit reluctant. Like, I'm trying really bloody hard, but now I'm not making money. So I turned away from that interaction a lot because I didn't want it to be that. But it is just being creative, being imaginative, and having a bit of fun with it as well, and being playful, and then giving him what... Because I remember that interaction where I did change it a bit, and we had a beautiful moment and chemistry, and he spoke about that for a couple of weeks to my grandma. He was like, me and Mikey had a good chat, so it's a good conversation, and it's a nice reminder for anyone listening. Yeah. There must be somebody in your life that you can create a moment with and create a bit of space and time for.
Mm. And something that might be a bit controversial, I think there's a fear for parents these days to make them keep children away from older people.
Yeah.
I just remember in my own childhood, when I used to go and stay with my granddad, I'd sometimes go out for a walk with some of his mates. Yeah. They were all retired miners. And it was like an episode of Last of Summer Wine. You know, I've had bloke in the 70s climbing trees to get birds' eggs for me. Kind of inappropriate these days, but
they knew where all the mushrooms were.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
And they were trying not to swear, you know.
Yeah.
There was a guy called Fazzle, was his nickname, and he was this really angry bloke. He'd got a really angry dog. And he was all on and then he just stopped himself.
He wasn't allowed to tell you why his name was Fazzle because you're too young. Yeah.
Did you ever find out why his name was Fazzle?
It's inappropriate, especially now.
Yeah. But again, for me, they were joyous times, and there's something I think between, children and older people, there can be a real bond that maybe the concerns of adults get in the way of that.
Big time.
Parents.
Yeah, well, older people have switched it off, and kids haven't turned it on yet, and that's why they're so similar. And it's wonderful. I mean, we grew up. My granddad was the doorman at a miners' welfare, so we had a really similar thing. Everyone knew us, and everyone. It didn't matter which table you sat on to play bingo or whatever. It was just a case. There was no Uncle Bad Touch. It was just you were in there, and they were all sound. Yeah. For us, and it was great. But
why do you think that divide has broadened and pushed each other? Because you've got sometimes this conception of, the younger crowd, they're just like this nowadays, and then the younger crowd are like, they're just old this nowadays. So it pushes one another aside. I just wonder why that feels like it's perpetuated.
Fake representation of both sides of people just looking for just meaning. So social media, as wonderful as it is and all the rest of it, it's not always real, it's not always true, but I feel that you've got so many people that are either looking for clout or just looking for exposure, that they're not in all these people that, I mean, my kids watch some YouTube channels and it's a family and we're a really happy family. And we do this and we do that. And you watch it and you think, you can see the guy's eyes are screaming behind because he's done. He spends all his days pretending to be a happy family.
Yeah.
And I know how quickly they grow up. And you know that he's going to hit a wall soon and be like, I've missed it. It's all on YouTube, but you've missed all of it. And it's the fake elements of, and I think back in the day there wasn't that sort of thing. There was more of a natural community, which was a community. You had to get up and move and see someone and make the effort. And and one thing that I can try and live by is, if you can, you should. And it's not, if you've got £1 million, I should pay your mortgage off. But if I can help you, or if there's something I could do, then I should. And I'll never forget, my mum used to be always at someone else's house. Always, I'm got to knit these eggs to this person. I've got to do this, because she knew that when she was older that someone would probably be doing it for her because it was the right thing to do within the community spirit. Whereas now, it's not necessarily. That's a really sad thing that's been lost. With technology.
My wife annoys me because she's too helpful. You know, so, oh please, you know, we've got to really do this, because she'll volunteer for anything.
I know that feeling.
And I want to be a grumpy old bastard, you know. But
it is bad.
I do feel that.
I think we've all got that guilt switch is very easily triggered, because everything you want to do is maybe sit in with the heating on and play on the computer and watch telly and whatever and just have a bit of a relax. And when someone even just mildly suggests it, that switch goes bing, and you can feel a little bit like, but ultimately, you're going to do the right thing.
And it's nice when you actually do it, usually.
Of course.
It's always a much nicer feeling.
You get the hit, don't you? You get the little hit coming through.
And of course, it's not just older people who feel lonely. Children can feel lonely. You know, if they're being bullied at school, that can be an incredibly lonely place to be.
Yeah. That's where it's transcended from.
And then adults with parents getting to a certain, with children getting to a certain age. You know, a single parent whose children leave home.
Yeah.
It can be devastating. Or, you know, something you've gone through with a child reaching puberty. It's natural for them to start separating from the parents.
Oh, completely. I mean, it's
that's
devastating.
a really painful process for the parents to go through.
Especially when you're involved. We did everything together. Everything's good, and it just comes one morning, like, right, dude, it's like.
And again, not to get to the semantics again, though, but if you're being, I was bullied, but is that not just being excluded because you feel outcast from the?
Well, that's one of those things where it's feeling excluded. Some of it is about our own insecurity, but some of it is people are being deliberately excluded by others. In an abusive way.
If they're forcefully pushing you out the circle.
That's where.
That's not your internal.
Well, you saw what I used to look like, didn't
you,
mate?
But
you can imagine that childhood.
Yeah, and I was bullied. I was bullied exactly the same. And I mean, even Moo 2 weeks ago, one of her closest friends was, she was just riding her like a donkey all the time, just riding her.
Yeah.
And I was trying to justify it in a roundabout way to say, look, she's one of your oldest friends, so she feels more comfortable to be able to do that to you. But what you've got to think about is what's going through her head, what's happening in her life. Her mum and dad have separated, this has happened, that's happened, and all this angst is coming out at you. And she kind of took that as a really grown-up thing as a 14-year-old. She was like, okay, I get it. And then I said, best thing, try and have a chat, try and talk to her. Just take her to one side. She went, okay. So this was 2 or 3 times that she'd broken down and really got angry and then sort of burst into tears. And we'd gone, oh, whoa. And we'd realised that it wasn't about cleaning your room, or it wasn't about not doing your homework. It was about, I'm really unhappy and really lonely because my friendship group aren't including me. Or they're not seeing that she's bullying me and they're not doing anything about it. So ultimately we moved forward, and she tried to talk to her, took her to one side. And this girl then, following week or whenever it was, basically turned around and said, oh, you're ugly, or you're this. And she went, oh, whoa, I thought we talked about this, mate. And she went, you didn't think I was going to listen to you, did you? So they all walked away to their class, and she went to put bunny ears behind her head, and she turned around and smacked her in the mouth.
Whoa.
And I said, good girl. I said, you carry on. And the thing that broke me more than anything was the self-righteous element of the people that she was with, who were meant to be her friends, that went, you shouldn't just resort to violence. And trying to be, it's almost like a fucking Instagram post to, well, I think I'd do this. Or
Yeah,
just,
I get you.
you can be opinionated after the fact, but she's just been through so much
Yeah,
horrible
trudge.
stuff. You've literally done nothing to back her up or to be involved or do anything, but now you can pass opinion because she stepped over a line. But guess what? She's not done it since. And I said to her, I couldn't be prouder of you. And if you need me to go into school and talk to them, and I've always said to both the girls, you can finish anything. You don't need to start it, but you will finish it. And I'd say the same to any kids. Yeah, I'm not telling people just go and put hands on them, but at the same time, if they won't stop, and the only way to reset their brain is by spinning their jaw.
Where'd you go with that, David?
Well, it's an approach.
It worked for us.
I've been there, man. That was the only. It's sad to say, isn't it? It's
what happened
definitely
after you
not
exploded?
part of the topic, but I've been there before, where the only way to stop it was that moment. And
yeah, but
it
that
did
was
stop
your
it.
lowest, lonely, depressive,
Yeah.
most worst state.
Yeah.
And it came to a head. You exploded. They didn't mess with Mikey anymore.
No, I know. Yeah.
And I'm not advertising that. If you want boxing classes, I've got places. But it's more a case of
I do actually.
because they're so small and they don't know how they're managing all these feelings. It just eventually comes out. And yeah, I was so proud of her.
Yeah, at the very least, is a metaphor of being able to take control yourself, rather than accepting a role of being a victim.
Yeah.
And again, I don't want to be in the business of victim blaming here. That's a really dodgy area to go to. But I mean, I guess this whole thing really about loneliness is what can we do for others, but what can others do for themselves?
Yeah.
What can we do for ourselves? And that sense of, okay, I'm not lonely, but I'm feeling lonely. What can I do about that?
Yes.
And in the end, no one can really comfort us. We can only ever comfort ourselves.
Yeah.
And if we're always looking for that external rescue, it's probably never coming.
No.
And it's about, what can I do? Where can I go? How can I meet people? There are opportunities to meet people online these days, and I'm not talking about dodgy dating
Hello,
apps
David.
and stuff like that.
You.
But there are friendship groups, local friendship groups, and things like. There's all sorts of things.
People reaching out.
There are possibilities. Doing volunteering, things like that. There's a way of getting out and meeting people.
And certainly don't do what I spoke about at the start, where you're not spotting the signs for it, because maybe things are coming your way and you're not noticing them because you're in this headset where nobody wants me anyway, and you're excluding to the point you get this chronic loneliness. So now, have you seen The Pursuit of Happiness? The great film, Will Smith. But at the end, the kid tells a little joke, and it's a guy in the boat, and then he capsizes, and he's in the sea. And this boat comes and it says, "Do you want to get in?" He says, No, I'm all right, thank you. God's going to rescue me." And the boat goes, and another one comes. He says, "Do you want to get in?" No, I'm all right. God's going to save me. And then he drowns and he goes to heaven. He says, "God, why didn't you save me?" He said, "I sent you 2 boats, you idiot."
Yeah.
And it's spotting them signs
Exactly.
and just noticing when things are around.
Well, it's easy to spiral into your own mire. It's really easy to focus on negative, but there's, again, we've spoke about this a million times, there's coping mechanisms for a lot of things. It could be walking the dog, it could be playing a game, it could be going and sitting with your kids for a minute, or let's turn the tablets off, let's turn the phones off. I've got 1,000 card games and board games that we try and play with the kids, because as much as they start out, "Oh God, I hate this," before you know it, they're kind of into it. Do you know what I mean? And it's only that little trigger, you only need that little hook. But I think
like you get me playing Call of Duty. Like,
exactly,
he hates
it. He hates it, but he lets me know he hates it for the full.
Did you actually hate it?
For the whole hour that we're playing. The new one is a bit different to the previous one. The previous one, we were both dynamite. The new one, we're both learning. And David's not got enough time left on this earth.
Good reframing.
As he's reminded me that he's not got enough time left to learn how to be good at this one. But I think that
we're supposed to be doing this for fun.
Yeah, exactly. And only because he knows that he can do better on the golf game that we're going to play later on in the evening.
Okay, yeah.
But there's a Robin Williams statement or quote, and it's along the lines of, "You never know what else anyone's going through, so be kind always." And that is really difficult to do. It's really difficult, because I will walk out of here with that in mind. Someone cuts me up and I'm going to scream and shout and be a nightmare of a person. But if you can ever just reset your brain just for a second and just remind yourself, look, you don't know what people are going through, because you've suffered in silence. You've suffered in silence. I know I have. And sometimes you don't have to say, "Are you all right?" You don't have to be direct. You don't have to highlight that someone is struggling mentally. You can just support subconsciously, and then I feel that can help.
I don't think we can beat that. And on that point, we're going to end. Thank you very much.